Cool.
Hello, guys. Welcome back to Time Under Tension. This is podcast number episode 5, and we are talking about roots today. So, roots, pretty much what it sounds like. I think we all know of roots being our foundation, but we don't all know where our roots are actually planted and who planted them. And I think it's a really important conversation to have. When was the first time that you were exposed to this thought about roots or started questioning it?
I think the first time that I was exposed to roots was actually during COVID. I had never thought about what I was rooted in or my inner being truly being grounded until I experienced meditation for the first time and had that understanding of feeling the ground, physical touch being in alignment with something more visual or something within.
That's great. And
How about you?
I think I've learned it progressively over time. It's like I thought I was rooted in certain things, and for me, I kind of use the language of values. And then once I examined my behavior, I found that maybe my roots weren't where I thought they were because the values that I thought that I held weren't the ones in which I was living. So that's when I really started to question, okay, who am I actually and versus who do I think I am? And so in what am I rooted? And can I potentially uproot some of that and establish a more firm foundation for who I am?
Yeah,
This
I
week,
think that's really cool. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you, but the point that you just made is so massively, I think, essential to this podcast in that regardless of what your roots are, when you find them, you have the ability to uproot them and replant um, and really begin to grow the fruits or, blossom into the being that you are created to be.
yes. And I think once you realize you have that power that you can actually change what you're rooted in, it removes some of the shame of feeling like you're not who you thought you were, or that your life has kind of led somewhere that you didn't expect, or has led to unproductive fruit in your life. But once you realize that you have power over that and can start to shift it, I think that it really opens up a lot of possibilities in life as to where you can go and the kind of person that you can shape yourself into being. This week, I heard a theory that I had not heard before. It's a psychologist, Robert Keegan, and he talks about these 3 stages of the evolution of self. The first one is the socialized mind, where you identify yourself with your relationship and with your rules. And that's almost half of the population. The next step is the self-authoring mind, where you recognize that you have a separate identity and you make your own choices. But this stage, although it has a lot more autonomy than, just I exist as a human, it can be pretty self-centered because you realize that you're unique and you can make your own choices, but there's not a deeper rooting than that, other than you being yourself independently. But a lot of us get stuck here. This is a large part of the population where we're like, okay, I know who I am. I'm independent. I can do what I want. I can make decisions for myself. And I think that's a big stage in our life developmentally when we're like teenagers and we start to kind of adopt that like rebellious mindset. But I don't think we all get to the final stage, which is only about 5% of the population, which is the self-transforming mind. And that's where you can hold multiple identities and hold beliefs that might contradict each other because you understand that your worldview is limited. And so you might hold 2 beliefs that seem contradictory, but might hold 2 separate truths. But I think in order to get to that final stage, you have to be grounded in who you are, not just saying like, I'm unique and I'm special and every decision I make has to serve me, but saying like, I know on a deeper level who I am, and what I believe so that I can hold thoughts that are other people's, like consider beliefs that might not be my own, and think about them and challenge my own thoughts without feeling like it's going to uproot who I am and carry me away.
Yeah, it sounds like that is the evolutionized or the matured cognitive dissonance, actual functionality in the mind when it's healthy. Um, I think something that you mentioned there, actually, as you were talking through it, I was like, I am totally in this process as you started saying that, because I feel like I absolutely existed as a human and that was it. And I wasn't really sure where my autonomy even came from because of my household childhood experience. I wasn't really making any decisions for myself, they were all made for me. Um, and so once I kind of felt that and started to try to transform self with the pressure I was feeling from God in COVID, I did kind of shift into that selfish mindset as well, where I had all this autonomy and I knew who I was separate from everybody else's opinion of me, but I still wasn't grounded in anything. So my decision making was not really rooted in anything that I could hold true to me. And so I still am struggling, even currently, to really find my values and hold myself to them to the point where I don't struggle with cognitive dissonance and I can get to a place where other beliefs can come into my space and I don't have to align with them necessarily, but I can see maybe a similar truth that I hold now in someone else's perspective and sharing that kind of common humanity.
Yes. And I think a common misconception is thinking that rootedness is this box where if I stay within it and I only surround myself with truths that I believe, then I'll be safe. But we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a world with a variety of people from so many different backgrounds and different belief systems. And I think the minute that we feel like our rootedness requires the vacuum, we isolate ourselves from other people and shut out other people's worldviews and don't even give them the grace to consider them or even to learn the truth in them. Because I do think that God speaks to us all in different ways. We limit ourselves so much on our own growth. So true rootedness requires an expansion of self, but
Mm.
that expansion also requires the rootedness that keeps you grounded so that when you're in the midst of that expansion, you can differentiate what you are versus what the outer is, what other people are, what they believe, maybe even their emotions. If you're someone who tends to identify with others' emotions like overly, having that rootedness is what's going to allow you to live a broader life. It's not restrictive and it's not going to keep you in a small bubble, which I think is also a fear.
Yeah, I think what that reminds me of is my own emotions, because I think what you're saying can apply to self reflection as well, where when you're feeling a kind of way, you have emotions, not making decisions on your emotional state of being, but making the decision based off the values that you set for yourself, the things that you are rooted in. I think separating the two and being able to say that your emotions and your feelings are extremely valid, but they don't need to be what drive your behavior. They can be the thing that show you what you may need, or maybe a root that needs uprooting because something that someone else is doing or a situation is causing you to feel a particular way that um, you are now able to look at and then reflect back to see, okay, well, what's that rooted in? Is that rooted in a past experience? Is that rooted in someone else's truth for me, not my own? Or is that rooted in a truth of mine? And so I have this very valid emotion that I can express in a way that allows others to grow because it does align with my values to react or respond in this particular way.
That's great. So, what do you feel like you've established your roots in the past that hasn't served you? Like, what kind of things? Where were your roots?
I think in my current journey, I have been uprooting a massive amount of lies that I've held as truths, and specifically that I am only loved for my outward appearance. If I can serve somebody in that, in my skill set, my athletic performance, I am only worthy if I am able to contribute in a way that makes this person's life better, or I'm rooted in everything that my dad told me I was going to be or should be. I felt like all of my roots were planted by others and none of them were planted by me. And now feeling this pressure to change really has come from not really understanding why I'm making decisions. And so when I would make decisions before, it was always an emotional reaction to a particular situation to either protect myself from getting hurt or to feel like this would be the thing that's going to equal love from somebody else, receiving love from somebody else. And I think a lot of my roots are external, validated, instant gratification driven roots that don't hold me down in any kind of storm, to be fully honest.
Yeah, and the thing is, and I think sometimes we forget this, our roots really do start with other people's. I think that's where we are as children when we are learning what to root ourselves in through the examples that are set for us and through the things that we're told. And I think part of the maturing process is being able to step back and say, does this serve me? Does this still serve me? Is this something that I actually believe? For a time, it did serve you. For a time, it was what you trusted because it was what was modeled for you. And I think this is like having a plant that you have in your house in a pot. And when there comes a point where you have to decide, like, is the plant going to be restrained to this size because it's going to stay in this pot? Or are we going to uproot it and plant it outside? But that's a really traumatic process. But that's what's required for expansion. But for a time, that pot served the purpose. It provided a safe place. It was where the plant knew it could expect all the nutrients in the water and the amount of light that it needed. And then there's that maturing process of, okay, now we're going to transplant and throw you out into the world. And if you're going to survive out here, you can actually thrive out here now, but now you're subject to a lot of other variables. We've got weather, we have the quality of the soil, someone's not tending to your amount of sunlight inside. And that's what it's like, I think, for us out in the world when we decide to mature. It's painful to do the uprooting, and it's painful to start to recognize that certain things that were nourishing you now hold you back. But I think that being able to stop and appreciate that they did serve a purpose for the time. There was a point in your life where being performance driven helped you get where you got. It helped you achieve certain levels in your life that have probably led to you being able to coach. But if your performance now continues to drive your self-worth and you're older and wiser and subject to a world that is fluctuating beyond your control, if your performance is completely the roots of your worth, then you're going to be unsatisfied or only partially satisfied as long as you're actually performing. And that's not really a sustainable place to live.
Yeah, I think to sum it up and make it really easy is that my roots were rooted in other people's soils. my roots were not my own. Nothing internally was I rooted at all, which is why I had no identity of self. Now I'm rooted in me and who I am, and I'm able to have roots that hold me in my place. And I'm able to know that none of those are going to be changing unless I feel an internal pressure that's going to change that for me. It's up to me if I get to withstand the storm. It's up to me what I hold on to and grab onto instead of this unreliable external root system that's just in other people who are imperfect, just like I am. And so now that my roots are God, for me, it's God, and I'm rooted in Him. The John 15:5 is something I have on my wallpaper because I do believe He is the vine and I am the branches. And without Him, I can do nothing, but with Him, I can bear fruit. And that's going to be what drives that desire in me to be filled with purpose and love all the time. So making that change was massively impactful, but just like you're saying, it's hard and it's filled with a lot of trauma you almost kind of re-experience because you're having to figure out where the roots that you need to prune are at, which can be something that can really be an eye-opening experience, I think, but all the more worth it because you absolutely have a better, joyful life because you know who you are and your source.
So I think you mentioned fruit, being able to bear fruit. And I think it's important to kind of put that into tangible terms. If someone is not sure where they're rooted, how do you identify that? How do you figure out what you're rooted in and begin that process of kind of reconstructing where you are?
I would love to hear your answer to this as well. I think my process of finding my roots started with self-awareness, and it started with my emotions, with my external circumstances, because when I first realized what I was rooted in, it was when I had an experience with someone I was in a relationship with, and I didn't make the decision to stay loyal because of my fear of being vulnerable. And if I exposed the things that I knew about me to this person, then they, in my mind, this was the route that they were going to leave because these things about me are not going to equal lovable. That was the route. And so me thinking that and feeling like I'm getting really close to somebody, now I'm nervous. Now, okay, but now in this situation, I'm able to see, why am I feeling this way? Like, oh, because I have a really genuine connection with this person and I'm feeling like I'm vulnerable. So my instant reaction was to cheat and have it get messed up so I didn't have to worry about getting hurt. And then I'm able to see before doing the action, okay, that's rooted in a lie that who I am is not going to be enough for somebody else. So I need to work really hard to uproot that and replace it with a truth that I am already whole, and me being me and being loved for me is what I want from somebody. And I have to learn to trust, and I have to learn to be vulnerable, and I have to learn to be willing to open up and have an open heart. Otherwise, the thing that I crave, which is having love and being loved, is in, again, something uncontrollable. So I just feel like when I was beginning the uprooting process, it was very much reflecting on my actions or being self-aware enough to see I'm emotionally feeling something and figuring out where that emotion is starting from. What childhood experience, what thing that was said to me, what lie have I told myself so long that's now a truth I live by.
And I think that that concept of self-awareness, I feel like what it really is it almost requires slowing down, where you experience a feeling and then you're able to stop and step outside of it, or you have a thought and you stop and step outside of it and can see it. And you hold it up and you examine it and you don't immediately identify with it, which I think is another aspect of rootedness, is being able to experience different aspects of yourself and not immediately identify your entire being with that thought, with that emotion. And I think that's part of the fruit. You know, I think that fruit can be your emotions, fruit can be your decisions or your thoughts. And like what I like to do is I'm a habit person. I really am into studying habits and trying to set good ones and having had to break a lot of bad ones in my life. But where I like to start with fruit is looking at my habits and like if I have a habit that isn't serving my goals, to me that's a fruit. And if it's not serving my goals, I need to trace it back to the root. So that's how I kind of get to a root that isn't serving me for that quote pruning process. And sometimes it's a decision. If I find a pattern in my life, you know, which requires a lot of honesty to be like, wow, I'm seeing myself at the same spot again. And it's super frustrating. But instead of just staying in that frustration, it's saying, okay, what led to this point? Is there a deeper belief? Is there a deeper lie here that I need to dig into instead of just focusing on the outcome of this? You don't want to be in that state of damage control where you're just trying to where you're kicking yourself for bad habits or for poor decisions or losing complete trust in yourself for that. I think it requires this analytical process of saying, okay, this behavior that I keep doing is not serving me, but it's coming from something, a deeper belief that on some level I do think is serving me. So I need to go and replace it with something that is actually in alignment with my values. And if you don't know your values, I think it's important to you can find like lists of values. Go and find a list of values and see what really stands out to you, things that have resonated with you, certain words or concepts that have resonated with you in your life, and write those out as your values. But then start to look at your behavior and track things back. When something doesn't sit right with you, or you do something that you have a negative feeling or guilt about, trace it back. Does this align with any of your values, or does it align with some value that you're holding that isn't in alignment with your truest values or your ideal values? You can change your values, but you need to know what they are first. And you need to be able to be honest with yourself and trace your behavior back to what you're actually valuing in order to begin that uprooting process.
Yeah, I think honesty is a huge part of that, and I really love so much that you're talking about values can change. They're not like a box, like you were saying before. Putting a box around our values is like putting our own selves in a box, and then we're really not able to grow and mature like we've been talking about. I just think that's a really, really great point, but it's also it hit me a little bit deeper today. Actually, you're touching on it. God showed me something right before this podcast in a devotional about Lent, and the message was Mary versus Judas, essentially. So Mary, her values and what she was rooted in absolutely led her to focusing on all things eternal and following God and being obedient and absolutely living her life full of fruit and rooted in something that was unchanging. Whereas, on the other hand, someone who is more concerned about money, more concerned about things of the world, idolizing those things and prioritizing those things as roots and what's going to be important in what decision they make. This is going to be the most important thing to do because outcome X, Y, Z. And it called me out because I feel like I have been in this place where I'm uprooting and replanting, and I've gotten myself to a place where I can celebrate it. I'm rooting myself in who I am on the inside and getting rid of a lot of the roots that are around filling myself with worldly food until binging behaviors, instead of filling myself with the Spirit and the Word of God, I'm uprooting that and rerouting with the Spirit and the Word of God, which has helped me grow so much in my spirit, period, and spiritual maturity. But in other areas, I'm still holding on to other people's opinions being the thing that's driving my behavior. And it was so eye-opening to me, because I'm sitting here praying to be more like Mary, to live a life that is constantly spirit-led, where all of my decisions are coming from the guidance of God, and I'm living in that space where I'm reflecting, because how can I be praying that and expect any kind of outcome if I'm still holding on to these roots that are in other people's opinions of me, them being my judges and not God, as well as earthly things and not eternal things that are going to absolutely fade and wither, that won't keep me full or keep me joyful. So you speaking to that, the honesty piece is so important, I feel like, in the self-reflection process, in establishing your roots, because if you're lying to yourself or not presenting the truth out loud and really owning it, then your roots are going to stay rooted in the things that are keeping you stuck.
Yes, and you owe it to yourself to be honest, because being stuck might be momentarily comfortable because you're not having to face yourself where you feel like you're falling short, but it is an exhausting place to live, because if you have this dichotomy of the things you think you value versus the values that are actually driving your behavior, you live in this clashing state all the time, where you just experience this decision fatigue because something comes up and is presented into your life, and the decision that you make in this situation will be dependent on what you value, but you're holding this value to your heart that isn't the value you actually want to hold to your heart. And so you get caught in this in between of, well, what's going to drive my decision? And you can't really make a clear decision that you're confident with if you're not rooted in your values. So although this process initially takes a lot of honesty, it can be very painful, and it's really tiring when you first start to do it, because you have to be on high alert as you really start to become self-aware and watch yourself and trace your behavior and decide what's serving you and what not. But once you do that and go through that initial uprooting and you stay faithful with it, everything becomes so much easier, because you have this system through which you can run your decisions thereafter. That's your filter. You know your values enough that when something comes into your life, when an opportunity does, or a fork in the road, it's clear which way you need to go, because you just check in with yourself and say, okay, does this align with my values? Does this align with my priority? If not, it doesn't serve you. And you can rest assured in that, because you've done the work to set yourself up as you want, as you are, in roots that you actually believe. So from our personal examples, you've mentioned a little bit about equating your external appearance with love and validation. So can you kind of walk me through that process between when you recognize that, and then and what your life looked like before and how you're framing that now?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to this one singular habit that I can't seem to completely break. And like you said before, decision fatigue is real, and your decision making, if you do it enough, leads to habits. And breaking the habit is the thing that's going to essentially be the pruning process for me. And I mentioned it a little bit before, but I tend to get really restrictive with food, then completely lose control and end up binging at some point in time, and it happens most of the time when I'm by myself, when I'm alone. And so really, when I'm going through this process of letting go of my external appearance, was when I made the disconnect that food is not the thing that's bad. It's not good or bad, it's food. You need it to survive. That's not the issue. The issue is that I'm rooted in my external appearance being what's going to equal love. And so once I made the disconnect there, I was able to start seeing those thoughts like you were saying before. I'm able to really see, okay, this behavior pattern of doing cardio for an hour after a bad night is a habit that I formed because to me it's equaling punishment for the behavior I did last night. And so all of these things are bits and pieces of their overall issue of just not being rooted in my own being, who I am, and believing that that's going to be enough for the world or enough for my purpose or enough for truly myself, because I'm struggling to believe, that I'm worthy in general. Like it's a true struggle. And so latching on to something that I can physically see was something that I just tended to do all the time because I didn't know anything else. If I can't see it, it's hard for me to trust it and all of these things. So now knowing that, seeing it, the past, that, all of my past has been validated through performance or external appearance, like we have said before. But now, in the process of surrendering that, I'm coming to see that my life is so much more full of joy and people love me for who I am. And it's much more obvious to me now because I'm willing to surrender the external appearance being the thing that I think is bringing others to me and my energy. It's understanding that who I am is, and the light that I shine is really what's attracting everybody into my space. And so that seed is very newly planted. So I'm going to have to continue to water that massively, and making sure that I'm nourishing that with truths and not continue to allow the negative thought patterns that are going to continue to come up because they've been a part of my life for so long, taking those thoughts and removing them and replacing with truth and understanding that it's a very new seed and it's not going to necessarily immediately bloom. I have to just make sure that I'm in the process with it.
And what's cool about that is you went from being reactive to proactive. Like reactively, you were doing cardio because of this other decision that was also reactive to a deeper truth that you were holding on to, a lie that you were holding on to. Whereas when you go through this process and become self-aware, you start to live life really proactively because you aren't just reacting to this avalanche of decisions that comes from this negative place. You're being proactive in establishing who you are, and then you can make a lot clearer decisions thereafter and be a lot more self-aware. And then every decision that follows once you establish that foundation. But I think becoming self-aware can be challenging, and it takes kind of knowing some areas in which you struggle. For me, that's finances. I really struggle being faithful in my finances, trusting that God has me, and he talks about it in the Bible a lot about pursuing him first and foremost, and all else will be added. It's like Solomon asked for wisdom and he got wisdom, but because he asked for wisdom, God's like, I'm going to give you everything else too, because you didn't ask for money, you didn't ask for fame. And those things are really just secondary to enhance our experience a little bit on earth in theory, but they aren't the things that should drive our behavior. And I didn't realize how central to my life I valued finances and would often make decisions based on that. And I had this habitual thought that if I didn't have to spend the money, then I shouldn't. And then if something happened and came up in life and I'd have to spend money on it, I would feel so stressed about it because I'm like, this isn't in my plan. I should be saving. I should be spending less. I should be able to save more in a year. Once I realized how many shoulds were in this area, that was my red flag that there was like a deeper lie driving my decisions here. And I would cling to money for control, and I would have a ton of anxiety and stress around any decision financially. And then you really challenged me in this to treat this like any other value, to look at a decision about money and align it with my values. Do I make this purchase because the purchase aligns with my values? It's not about whether or not I should or shouldn't spend the money. Obviously, you have to budget, but the first decision should always be, is this thing that I need to buy or invest in something that's in alignment with my values? Yes or no? And then the decision comes, okay, is it within my budget? And that's where the shift happened for me, when I started to realize I'm not aligning things with my values. I'm reacting anxiously because I'm trying to filter every decision through this filter that isn't serving me and isn't really in alignment with what I truly value. And I was using comparison as the driver. I shouldn't buy this because so and so wouldn't buy this if their finances were in this state, or I should buy this because this is where I should be at this point in my life. And again, that's where the shoulds come in. So for me, whenever I find shoulds or comparison, I know that I need to get to a deeper root. So now it's like I can look at a decision and think, okay, is this serving my overall value system? Is this something that I want when I think about who I am in the future? Is this something that I want to be spending money on? And then I can filter it through that, and it becomes a lot simpler. And although that initial uprooting was really uncomfortable, I have a lot more peace now because I feel like I'm living proactively. And I think if you feel like you're a victim to life, if you feel like things happen to you, that is your number one sign to go to your roots, to start this process of becoming self-aware. Because if you feel like life is happening to you, it means that you are not the author of your values. It means that you have adopted these other values either from your past or from the expectations of others that are not serving you, and yet they continue to drive your behavior. And so you see the fruits in your life that aren't serving you and aren't what you ever wanted, because you're not starting at the beginning of that process where you're establishing who you truly are.
I think that's super powerful. And I just want to add one more story that really ties it all together, kind of what we're both sharing, but in an example that really lays out someone who is extremely rooted in their values and was able to make a decision and never, not even for a second, think about making a different decision. And so the situation was a student athlete had an experience in an FCA meeting where sexuality was brought up. And so the overall value system of this particular group of people in the FCA community was that someone of sexuality that wasn't man and woman could not come speak because it was not in alignment with what God says in their opinion. And this particular athlete is very rooted in her values and her idea of relationship with God and her idea of community, and how she grew up was that sexuality, regardless, doesn't matter. We're supposed to love everybody for who they are, and everybody has something they can add that will create value and perspective, like we mentioned in the very beginning. And so she decided to step away, and 4 or 5 other athletes immediately followed. And it showed her ability immediately to, one, fight for what she believed in. And then when that wasn't necessarily reciprocated or tolerated, I'm not really sure the word accepted might be better, she knew that that wasn't a place that she belonged. And the cool part about her was that she showed them a lot of grace, and she wasn't mad or upset at them. She just realized that what they believe is different than what she believes. And so she's not going to associate with that group of people. And it's cool what they believe, and it's cool what she believes. And so that was extremely powerful to me. But the biggest thing it showed me was that she is massively done the work to be rooted in her values and her decision making is very clear and concise, and led to her starting an entirely new group and aligning a whole new community of people who can talk about spirituality in a different way.
Yes. And what's so cool is, although that's a scary step of asserting your values in a place where you will likely lose the acceptance of other people, that is a foundation for true deeper connection, because now she is connected with people who share the same values, and that is one of the deepest foundations that you can have with others. So if you also find yourself in a place where you're lacking quality relationships, I think that this is a really important process, because if you really establish who you are and what you believe, it's a quick filter for everything in your life, including your relationships, but it will lead to really deep rooted relationships, and also challenge others to start to question what they believe and decide if they're living in alignment with their own values. So there's a lot of runoff effects from doing this. All right. So just going to end it with a quote, one of my favorites. Michael Jordan said, "Once I made a decision, I never thought about it again." And I love this because I'm someone who's very indecisive and goes back and forth on things. But I think that decisiveness really comes from knowing what you're rooted in and knowing your values. And you will expend so much less energy waffling around in life, flailing around trying to figure out what you should do or who you should be or what you should decision you should make in any given situation, if you start with knowing who you are and in what you're rooted. Awesome. Thank you guys for listening.
Mic drop.
Please like, subscribe, comment below, and we will see you on the next episode.